Okay. Welcome. We are in 2 Kings. I believe this is week 11. Yeah, week 11 in this Bible study series. My name is Jared Castline. I just like to create things mostly for my benefit, but then I'll also share them online for free so that other people enjoy them. Most of the content on my website, castlineministries.org, is kind of Bible study related, typically for small groups. This one that we're going through, which is a Bible in a Year plan I came up with, is more of a personal study. I plan on making some adjustments based off of how this goes, and I've got a video explaining kind of how I've came up with the idea. If you want to check that out, it's at the start of this series. But each week, we kind of are focused on a different book of the Bible, and this week we're on 2 Kings. 2 Kings, again, a continuation of 1 Kings. They weren't separated. Originally, it would have just been called Kings, and it reads very much the same as 1 Kings. 1 King, you start off with Solomon, which was pretty good, and then you kind of get the breakdown and separation of Israel and Judah, and now you've got all these kings from Israel, all these kings of Judah, and it's bouncing back and forth with some stories of Elijah. 2 Kings, very similar read, except instead of Elijah, you have Elisha, which definitely isn't confusing at all. But Elisha has more miracles recorded about him. Some of them are very similar to what Elijah did. So actually, one of the first stories, Elijah is walking away with Elisha, and they're seen crossing a river, and Elijah smacks the river with his robe, and it splits. They walk across. They're out in the wilderness, and Elijah gets picked up by a whirlwind of fire. Little trivia question. Here we go. Here's the question. Who else outside of Elijah was picked up in a chariot of fire or something similar to that? Answer in 3, 2, 1. If you answered Enoch from the book of Genesis, you are correct. He was another one that was described as being taken up to the heavens. So instead of dying, he was just brought up. But interestingly, on Elisha's return, he does the same thing. He takes off his cloak, he smacks the river opens up. And so you kind of get the people are just like, okay, well, we can tell the blessing of Elijah is on you. So he's the natural inheritor of Elijah and that ministry. So you get sort of the stories of the kings, but the first part of 2 Kings has a lot of these stories with Elisha. And he's pretty fun to read about as well. And he's kind of developing this whole group of people, his disciples, which is really cool. And funnily enough, I'm pretty sure it's Elisha. Now I'm going to have to look around and find it. Feeds a crowd of, what is it, like 400, something like that. Multiplied the bread. I found it. Look at that. I never found it. So he brought some bread, give it to the people, eat. Give it to the people, for this is what the Lord said they will eat. So he said it before them, the Lord promised, and they had left over. Oh, what was the number? I know there was a number. Oh, man. Sorry, guys, you're getting me real time trying to read and find it out. It says 100 men. Give it to the people. So you get the first multiplication of bread story is actually Elijah in the Old Testament. So when you're reading the New Testament, you get those stories of Jesus multiplying the bread and the fish. Now you know, hey, I should come back and read this story. Very interesting. He heals diseases, multiplies food, makes food clean, raises somebody from the dead. Super cool stuff. So I really like Elisha. I think that's kind of like my highlight from 2 Kings. Once you get through Elisha, and he dies fairly early in this. I just saw it. I wonder if I've already passed it. He dies fairly early on, and then it's back to, and the king of Israel, and the king of Judah, and the king of Israel. He died, they did this. Never great. I want to say it is floating axe at the siege of Samaria. Elisha's still alive there. Look, I should really have notes when I do these, you guys. You just get me pretty raw. Elisha's death. So in chapter 13, fairly further on. There's a few kings mixed up in there. So you go back and forth. Here is my recommendation for how you can read Second Kings. I actually have another study that I've done on this podcast. There's actually a series where I went through the series with my sister, which was really fun, and it's through the line of Jesus. What this is the first Bible study that I wrote for my small group at the time, and we were just following the different people in the lineage of Jesus. So we started with Adam and Eve, and then we did Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and just kept following that line of people as far as we can that were kind of in the Old Testament. So then you get David and you get Solomon, and then you get this long line of kings that are in the line of Jesus. And so that was one of the study sheets, and I just remember I spent some time going through each of the kings, and they have bits that are in Second Kings, but also it's easier to read in Chronicles, because Chronicles tells the story without the interruptions jumping to the kings of Israel. It just focuses on Judah. So I think the study just focused on the Chronicles version, which was really helpful. But if you can go through that and sort of what I did, because I'm a teacher, as I gave them all like a grade for how they were. And so I just remember there being like a couple of kings that got an A, and even then it was like an A minus, because at the end of their life they did something stupid. So that's what it's like reading a lot of these, is you just get a bunch of this. But what's difficult about reading Kings is then it also flips to these kings of Israel and kings of Judah. I really recommend if you kind of Google the kings of Israel and Judah. That way you get a breakdown for what kings were reigning when, so that you kind of have like a good timeline and something to picture as you go through. I'd really recommend that. That made it make a lot more sense for me as you're kind of going through this. There are some good kings that pop up, and what I really like is one of the kings towards the end, they're cleaning out the temple, and the guy's like, oh, hey, by the way, here's this book, and it's like the book of the law, and he's like, they read it to him, he's like, oh, no, and he ripped his clothes, he's like, guys, we have not been doing this right. And instead of just like, they reform, and they're like, no, we're going to tear down all these towers that we've built, we're going to get things right. That's my favorite king in all of this. So who was that? That was Manasseh, or it's towards the end. I'll find it, you guys. There's some good ones. A couple of good ones towards the end, but by that point, the rebelliousness is just so bad. Amon, Manasseh, Hezekiah. Hezekiah became terminally ill. That doesn't sound right. Josiah's reform. Josiah. I think that was. Yes. The book of the law found. So this is Josiah. Josiah is definitely my favorite. So if you want to know, that is 2 Kings 22 and 23 is that story. So I think that's as close as you get back to a highlight. Josiah was one of the ones that kind of got a pretty good score in my book, but wasn't exactly perfect. But I think I gave him the highest score out of all the kings. What you get, so the kind of like the meta story going on, you got the kings, and they're kind of doing bad. You get this group called Assyria. They're kind of out east, and they show up, and they are this is like the first, let's see here, I think the order of it is Assyria, Babylon, then Persia. So these are the different empires. So you start with the Assyrian Empire. They come in, and they're just laying waste, and they end up taking the Israelites into exile. Judah remains. They hold off. They make it through the Assyrians, but then comes along Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar, and Nebuchadnezzar sacks Jerusalem and takes them all into exile. You get a bit more of that story in more detail when we'll get to Jeremiah, so we'll look forward to that. But they get taken out by Babylon. Babylon took over Assyria. Assyria was first, then Babylon, and then Babylon, and you read about this in Daniel, Babylon gets taken over by Persia. So those are the empires. If you are interested in, you're sitting there like, oh my gosh, history with all these other empires, I can keep it right. I'll give a quick shout out to a great podcast I've listened to for years, which is the 10-minute Bible hour with Matt Whitman. And he's a historian by trade, but also deeply steeped in the Bible stuff, done church stuff. So anytime he goes through a series, and he's done different books of the Bible, he does great at covering the history. And he did a series on Ezra, Nehemiah, and he did Esther. So he covers a lot about those empires. And I have that. I'm not like, I don't know everything, but I at least have it in my head about which empires came when. And then you had the Persians and then the Greek and then the Romans. And you kind of get all these different groups sort of in a timeline in your head, which is very useful. So give him a listen. 2 Kings enters. Now we are, I think I said one of the lowest points with Judges. This would mark another low point. You've got, now we're all in exile. Nobody's living in the promised land. How much worse can it be? Your only hope is this last little paragraph where the would have been king, I think his name is Jehoiakim, the king of Babylon, was like, oh, hey, you know what? Why don't you get out of your prison clothes and you're going to dine with me for the rest of your life. So you have the true king of Israel, who would have been, not sitting in chains. You have him eating with the king of Babylon. So you have this like slight, very small little hope of like, maybe not everything is done yet. And that's how 2 Kings ends. And then you turn the page, and we're not going into 1 Chronicles. No. Actually, our Bible study will go from 2 Kings into Isaiah. And the reason for that is we're not following our typical Bible order. We are following we can call it traditional, conventional, the Jewish ordering, kind of how it was structured before. How they're structured, I have a whole video on it, is very different. We even have different section titles. But Chronicles originally was the last book in the Old Testament, and I think it makes sense for it to be the last. It kind of goes over everything. So we're actually going to jump from 2 Kings to Isaiah, which I think works really well going into the prophets, because the prophets have this overlap of the end of the Israelites into exile. So like Isaiah has a lot of that last period predicting the fall and also predicting the return from exile. So it's like placed really well when you place it right after 2 Kings. And know when we get into Jeremiah, it's the same thing. It's kind of like right at that middle ground of predicting the fall happening, into exile, prediction of the return from exile. So I think it's really cool to have those books of the Bible there. We'll see how we do when we read them. All right, that is all I got on 2 Kings. I hope you guys are enjoying this. Would love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye.